Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofOutlander.com. For all things Outlander, from the Diana Gabaldon book series to the Stars TV series and everything in between. This is week 22 of our Voyager read-along, episode 64. We're covering chapters 58 and 59. I hope your holidays have been wonderful in all the ways that can be celebrated. And it's now New Year's Eve. It's a goodbye to 2016, and I can't think of a better way to be doing it. So in Outlander World this week, Matt Roberts did a quick Q&A on Twitter after posting he was co-writing the last episode of Season 3. And he's also reading Drums of Autumn in preparation for Season 4. OutlanderBTS.com did a really nice write-up on this Q&A. Since I decided to do the podcast over Christmas and New Year's, we are now only a month away from finishing with Voyager. What a journey it's been. It'll be around 6 months worth of podcasts. Thank you for spending half a year with me on this read-along. I feel I've gotten a deeper understanding to these characters and found many new things, just like in every reread that I do. I hope it's been a worthwhile experience for you as well. I would love to get your feedback on what the read-along has meant to you, done for your Outlander experience, and what you might like in the format change or to keep everything the same. And if there's anything else you'd like to add, I'm all ears. And as soon as this read-along finishes up, I plan on doing The Scottish Prisoner because there's a lot of information that applies to Season 3. And as soon as Season 3 ends, I'm going to do a Drums of Autumn read-along as well. I might stretch it out a little bit longer so the podcast can stay between 45 minutes and an hour, but I'll let you know when we get there. So if you'd like to give me feedback, the call-in line is 719-425-9444. You can always email me at adramofoutlander@gmail.com or leave it on any of the social media places. And thank you for joining me at my table for conversation and a dram of Outlander. Let's jump in with Chapter 58, Mask of the Red Death. This opens with Claire reciting an A.E. Housman poem as they are dressing for the governor's reception. She only recites the 2 stanzas. Oh, who is that young sinner with the handcuffs on his wrists? And what has he been after that they groan and shake their fists? And wherefore is he wearing such a conscience-stricken air? Oh, they're taking him to prison for the color of his hair. 'Tis a shame to human nature, such a head of hair as his. In the good old times 'twas hanging for the color that it is. Though hanging isn't bad enough, and flaying would be fair, for the nameless and abominable color of his hair. And it continues to go on. And she is saying this to Jamie for a specific reason. They were talking as Jamie was putting a wig on to cover his telltale hair. And that's what inspired Claire to recite that poem to him. She had memorized A.E. Housman's poetry while in the lounge at the hospital. There wasn't time really to read long books, and this fit the bill. Jamie was leery of her breaking out into poetry again, and he was dressed in the nines as a disguise, trying to look like a Frenchman. Claire was quite fascinated by his transformation. Red-heeled shoes and silk stockings clocked in black, gray satin breeches with silver knee buckles, snowy linen with Brussels lace 6 inches deep at the cuff and jabot. The coat, a masterpiece in heavy gray with blue satin cuffs and crested silver buttons, hung behind the door, awaiting its turn. He finished the careful powdering of his face, and licking the end of one finger, picked up a false beauty mark, dabbed it in the gum arabic, and fixed it neatly near the corner of his mouth. There, he said, swinging about on the dressing stool to face me. Do I look like a red-heated Scottish smuggler? I inspected him carefully from full-bottomed wig to Moroccan-heeled shoes. You look like a gargoyle. But Fergus said, no, he looks like a Frenchman. Much the same thing, said Jamie, as he sneezed. Begging your pardon, Fergus. In his 3-inch heels, he's a towering 6'7". Claire is dubious, having never seen a Frenchman that size. Jamie thinks no one will be looking at him anyway, because of what Claire is wearing. The top was cut low in the front. The décolletage was filled with a froth of lace that rippled down the front of the bodice in a series of V's. Matching lace cascaded from the elbow-length sleeves in graceful white falls that left her wrists bare. She was wishing she had something to wear around her neck because of that inviting neckline, and Jamie presents her with a black coral pin to wear upon a white ribbon around her neck. No, they won't be looking at me, Sassenach. Half will be looking at you and the other half at Mr. Willoughby. Claire wonders if it's wise to take Willoughby along, since there'll be alcohol. Jamie says he will behave or he will take back the red coral he gave to him. Claire is suddenly worried about going to the party. What if Jamie's wig falls off and he's taken straight away to the Royal Navy? He thinks no one will notice him, even if they are from the Porpoise, which he doubts would happen anyway. Then Jamie scratches at the wig, but Fergus assures him there's no lice. The maker dusts them with hyssop and horse nettle. Fergus wore his own hair powdered and sported a dark blue velvet suit. Fergus is pimpin' out. Marcelie came in wearing a soft pink dress. Claire thought she glowed just a bit too much. She asked Marcelie as they walked down the hall if she was using the tansy oil, but Marcelie ignored her and blew her off. Claire's thinking Miss Marcelie is with child. There are more important things to worry about anyway. That's what Claire was thinking. They arrive at the governor's mansion, and it's described in detail. It's as grand as expected. Jamie was becoming quite nervous, and his fingers twitched against the gray satin. What nervous tells do you have? I do what Jamie does. I tap on my leg. Almost all of us have some sort of tell, and as they enter, there's a reception line in the foyer. All sorts of minor dignitaries were there, along with an admiral and Lord John Grey, the new governor. Lord John Grey had his hair under a wig this night. That's an unusual thing. Well, at least for him it is. But she recognizes him regardless. And rumor has it his wife refused to leave England to come to Jamaica. He recognizes Claire and greets her warmly as Mrs. Malcolm. So Leonard hadn't told him. She greeted him equally, and she remarks on her lack of formality the last time they met. He compliments her looks and says island life is treating her well, better than the miasmas of the ship. Ding, ding, ding. That's one of Diana's favorite words, miasma. He was told she was unwell by Leonard and asked if she's recovered. Oh, entirely. And she turns to introduce Jamie to him, her husband. At this, Lord John Grey has gone completely green. He stared at her, then at Jamie and back again, growing exceedingly pale. Jamie nods graciously toward the governor. John, it's good to see you, man. OMG, John is freaking out right now. Wife? Imagine what's going on in his head. John, unable to speak, leaves Jamie the opportunity to fill him in. They will speak after, but right now he is Etienne Alexandre. Then Jamie introduces his wife, Claire. John looks wildly at her. Claire? Claire? She has no idea why her first name might affect him so strongly. She thought he might faint. Girl, you have no idea what's coming. So at this, John has to greet other people as the governor, and Jamie and Claire move into the main part of the residence. Claire describes the main salon, the crowd, and the music playing. This is her MO, remember. And without a sponsor to introduce them, it could have been dicey, but Jamie had the foresight to bring Mr. Willoughby. He definitely is a crowd pleaser. Jamie introduces him to the first young woman as Mr. Yi Chen Cho, late of the Celestial Kingdom of China, and she welcomes him delightedly. This is what starts the introductions around the room. Claire and Jamie would meet most of the influential islanders quickly. He is Etienne Alexandre, and her Claire, his wife. And Claire was saying they've just arrived from Martinique, and knowing no one, this opens the door for the young woman to show her around. Within an hour, young Miss Williams has taken Claire around the entire room to meet dozens of people. Jamie was across the room chatting with a group of men interested in his French sugar trade. So now we have social media. We used to just have plain old telephones or letters. This was the way to get around quickly. Claire is wondering what Jamie is really up to, but she knows he will tell her when he's ready. That is a patient wife. I will say that frustrates the absolute hell out of me not knowing what my husband is up to. She sees Marcelly and Fergus dancing together. They don't need anybody else to talk to. She's glowing, and Fergus has foregone his usual hook for a glove pinned onto his coat. Claire was dancing with a short English planter. He was wheezing pleasantries into her bosom. He must have been quite wee, because Claire's about 5'6" in the books, and even if she has heels on, she's maybe 5'8". And Mr. Willoughby was surrounded by a group of women vying for his attention. He was slightly flushed. And when her dance was over, Claire conversed with a group of women and asked about Abernethys. It's interesting how it seems the social mores are so alien to us in the 21st century that there needs to be this formal introduction in order to have any meeting. There's little direct contact with somebody in the social strata. But now that I think of it, it hasn't really changed in upper society. I just happen to live among simple folk and am one myself. But even to get a job, the simplest job today, like McDonald's or other fast food or entry-level retail, it's who you know. It's not generally your resume because everything's online and there is no face-to-face contact, so it's a bit challenging. It was interesting to look at this at first thought that it was so different. It's not really different. And as she was talking to this women, one of them remembered who the Abernethys are. Then the stories and the gossip begin. Claire steers the conversation, asking if Mrs. Abernethy has indentured servants or slaves. None of the women had been to Rose Hall, but they had heard. And then the gossip quickly changed to another topic, and Claire slipped away to the lounge room, her ears ringing. She does so much better in the company of men or like-minded women. And she sees Jamie speaking with the tall red-haired woman, who thought his attention was quite flattering, but Claire knows he's imagining their own daughter Brianna that he's never met. Claire takes refuge in the silence of the outer retiring room. It was luxurious. It had 3 different rooms altogether, one for the privy, one for storage of hats, shawls, and other clothing, and there was a huge looking-glass dressing table and a lounge which Claire eyed, but duty called she couldn't lie upon it and rest her weary feet. Though she had learned nothing new about the Abernethy plantation, she did learn about several others in the area worth looking into. Would Jamie call upon Lord John Grey to help look for young Ian? Good question. And this segued into Claire thinking again about Lord John Grey's very strong response in learning she is Jamie's wife. He looked as if he'd seen a ghost. She looked in the mirror, squinting, and couldn't see anything unusual in her appearance. I think she's been a clotheed. Everyone who knew her or knew Jamie had been married before treated her like a ghost on her return. Why would this friend be any different? Or was it something more? Was it her spidey sense tingling that it wasn't just a wife, or Claire wife, that he thought dead? Jealousy? Envy? Something deeper? As she looked, she thought Mrs. McIvers had prettied her up quite nicely, and she straightens her hair and heads back out. She made her way to the refreshment table, and there was a wide array of foods, some of which she couldn't name. She filled a plate with fruit and turned absent-mindedly, running smack into Reverend Archibald Campbell. He greets her in surprise as she wipes mango off his abdomen. Making friends and influencing people are Claire. Of course, he's having open disdain for her cleavage, and she's worried about him calling her Mrs. Malcolm in case anybody else hears. And she offers her apologies hearing about his sister, and he's been unable to locate her. He's going to beg the governor to assist in the search, or he never would have attended a party such as this. You know, the Reformation brought a variety of changes to the church, with the separation of Catholicism and Protestantism, but it really lowered the value of fun and frivolity as part of it. And Claire begins to say she will help when he interrupts her, saying it's the fault of the Papist Stuarts. Here's what he says. No one can help, he interrupted. His eyes were bleak. It was the fault of the Papist Stuarts, with their wicked attempt upon the throne, and the licentious Highlanders who followed them. No one can help, save God. He has destroyed the house of Stuart, he will destroy the man Fraser as well, and on that day my sister will be healed. Claire is quite aghast at this, and very uneasy, because he said Fraser, and she was thankful that Jamie was nowhere to be seen. And he goes on to explain that it's a James Fraser who seduced his sister and took her away from her family and proper loyalties. What the heck? How did that happen? And she tries to make an excuse and flee Campbell at this point, but he continues talking, deriding all the lewdness as he eyes a group of people with Mr. Willoughby in the middle of them. He is definitely a wet blanket, this guy. And then he starts to quote scripture. Let the women learn with all sobriety, avoiding all gaudiness of clothing and broided hair. He seemed to be hitting stride. No doubt Sodom and Gomorrah would be up next. A woman who has no husband should devote herself to the service of the Lord, not disporting herself with abandon in public places. Do you see, Mrs. Alcott? And she's a widow, who should be engaged in pious works. Yeah, that's pretty funny. So the widow, Alcott, is having fun and giggling with Mr. Willoughby. She's the infamous Merry Widow of Kingston. Clearly, he doesn't like women very much. He has some deep issues. And Claire's able to get away from him and to go find Fergus to dispatch Willoughby quickly and get him out of there. Campbell is completely offended, and he rudely makes his way out to the terrace by knocking into people. Claire breathed. Conversation with that man is like exchanging frivolities with a public hangman. Though she recalls the only hangman she knows is far better company than Campbell. Yes, I would say Monsieur Forêt is far superior at conversation. Ugh, the hangman's grease. Ooh, gives me the willies remembering it. She finally sees Jamie, and he's moving toward the governor's office, and she decides to join him, and she has to push her way through the crowd. She finds herself in the long hallway with candled sconces, windows, and military pistols, knives, shields, and swords on the walls, and she thought it was quiet away from the main salon. And she notices also that the long Turkey carpet silences her steps. Turkey in capital from Turkey, so it's Turkish. She's doing it again, noticing all the details to size up the space, create familiarity, maybe safety. I wonder if she knows she does this when entering an unfamiliar location or situation. She turns down a shorter hall and hears muffled male voices, and she sees a light. She must have found it, the governor's private office. What she hears stops her dead in her tracks. It's the emotional tone and not so much the word, "Oh, God, John," is what she hears Jamie say. And she creeps silently forward and peers in to see Jamie and John in a fervent embrace. She can't move or speak. Her mind is reeling, right? That was probably pretty shocking the first time you read it. Jamie's back was to the door, but John could have easily seen her had he looked into the hall, but he wasn't. He was staring at Jamie with a naked hunger that caused Claire to blush just seeing it. At this, she startled and dropped her fan. John's head jerked up to look, and she bolted down the hall as fast as she could. She stood in the shadowed corner of the salon, shaking. She felt cold and sick to her stomach. What in the name of God was going on? See, it was her spidey sense earlier. She knew something's weird. But then we get to see one of Claire's tendencies. She goes to dark places when she doesn't have enough information. I confess, I can do this as well. It's somehow a way to protect oneself and to try and think of all the terrible things, so if it happens, it's manageable. But it's not always a great thing to do if it's not nipped quickly in the bud with good information. Here's what she was thinking. The governor's shock at learning that she was Jamie's wife was now partially explained. That one glimpse of unguarded, painful yearning had told her exactly how matters stood on his side. But Jamie was another question altogether. He was the governor of Ardsmuir Prison, Jamie had said. On another occasion, do you ken what men in prison do? She did know what they did. And she would have sworn on Brianna's head that Jamie couldn't, under any circumstances whatever. At least she would have sworn that before tonight. She closed her eyes, chest heaving, and tried not to think of what she had seen. Of course, she couldn't stop seeing it. And yet, the more she thought of it, the more impossible it seemed. The memories of Jack Randall might have faded with the physical scars he had left, but she could not believe that they would ever fade sufficiently for Jamie to tolerate the physical attentions of another man, let alone to welcome them. But if he knew Grace so intimately as to make what she had witnessed plausible in the name of friendship alone, then why had he not told her of him before? And why would he go to such great lengths to see the man as soon as he learned he was in Jamaica? And she started feeling sick again, and she really wanted to sit down. And then the door opens from the governor's office, and he returns to the party. His face was flushed, and she wanted to murder him right there on the spot. She is a jealous wife, and now she has amuck emotions. And then Jamie comes out of the office. He's reserved and cool-faced, but Claire could see the emotion brewing underneath. But she couldn't interpret it. Was it excitement or apprehension, fear and joy? Something else? She had never seen him look this way before. And Jamie began strolling around the room. He was looking for her. But she stayed hidden. She didn't want to face him right now. When he'd gone out to the terrace to see if she was there, she went to the retiring room. She just wanted to hide for a minute, just to sit down. She opened the door, and the familiar feminine sense struck her along with a professional one. She sees Mina Alcott sprawled on the red chaise, dead, with a severed throat. Blood poured from the wound. And she felt paralyzed, unable to scream for help. And the door opens, and another woman saw it too. And at this, the screaming begins, and as light streamed in, she saw the footprints leading toward the window, the small, neat prints of a felt-soled foot, outlined in blood. Okay, so we need to take just a moment. Claire is an absolute emotional mess. She sees something she cannot compute between Jamie and John, then finds a dead woman with Willoughby's prints leading from her. Jamie obviously has things to tell her. The jig is up. Sometimes his withholding of information is damaging. He should have told her the minute he knew John was on Jamaica. Like with Leary, his fear overshadows his good sense. It overshadows his trust of Claire. It's a mess and needs to be cleaned up. And it's Claire's responsibility not to freak out with limited information on board. But she's only been back 4 months. Part of that time, they were separated because she was on the Porpoise. But you think he would have learned with the whole Leary Gate thing that withholding information from Claire is a bad idea, and she knows something's amiss. She could tell. He was odd. But it's been 20 years, and trusting her with everything, I bet, is scary. But I think he should have learned his lesson with Leary. And then lastly, where does the good Reverend fit into all of this? Chapter 59, in which much is revealed. Jamie's been taken somewhere, and Claire, incoherent and shaking, is in the governor's private office with Marcelie. And Marcelie's trying to soothe Claire and put a cool cloth on her face. Since Jamie had brought Mr. Willoughby, he was being questioned. Marcelie is stunned it might be Mr. Willoughby. Claire wouldn't have thought so either. Claire could barely think straight with all that had happened in the last half hour. She could still see John and Jamie together in this very office like a painting in her mind's eye. "I just don't believe it," Claire says aloud. Marceline echoes her. But Claire's talking about Jamie and John having a physical relationship, not about Willoughby's innocence or guilt. Marceline says Willoughby is a heathen, but she knows him, and they lived with him. He couldn't have done it. And Claire wonders if she really knows Jamie. She would have sworn to it, but she remembers him asking her this. Will you take me and risk the man that I am for the sake of the man you knew? She thought there was little difference between the two, but what if she were wrong? It makes perfect sense for her to think that. 20 years is a long time. She has this outburst and Marceline's in the room. I'm not wrong, I muttered, clutching my glass fiercely. I'm not. If Jamie could take Lord John Grey as a lover and hide it from me, he wasn't remotely the man I thought he was. There had to be some other explanation. And inside of her head she hears, he didn't tell you about Leary. And out loud again she exclaims, that's different. And Marceline says, what's different? And Claire brushes it off and says it's taking a very long time. It was actually 2:00 in the morning, according to the walnut clock. Why the detail here? Is it Claire making sense of the space? Fergus enters, looking worse for wear, with the militiaman, and he tells Marceline they can go and asks Claire if she's coming or waiting for Jamie. Claire will wait. Fergus will send the carriage back to wait for her then. The militiaman said something tart under his breath to Fergus, and Fergus glared at him. It looks like the militiaman is really wanting Fergus to hit him. Instead, Fergus gives him $1 million smile and thanks him for his assistance in this trying situation. Fergus then stuck out a black-gloved hand. When the man grabbed it, he pulled back, ripping it from the coat. A small stream of bran struck the parquet floor. And Fergus says, keep it as a token of my appreciation, leaving the man horror-stricken with this severed hand in his own hand. Very clever, Fergus. An hour goes by, then the governor enters the room. She notices his handsome looks again, then places the untouched glass of brandy down and stands to face him. Where's Jamie? John says he's still being questioned, and he's quite surprised by Jamie's ability to speak French. Claire tries to bait him. I don't suppose you know him well at all. He didn't take the bait. He took off his wig and placed it aside. He wonders if Jamie can keep up his impersonation. Claire believes he can, and asks where he is. They're in the formal parlor. Claire is just about to go, and he tells her not to, and she opens the door, looks down the hall, and quickly shuts it. It's the Admiral from the receiving line coming down the hall with a slew of officers, and one face she knew, Captain Leonard. He was clean and freshly beaten, but it was him. And she was desperately trying to find a place in the office to hide, but there was none. All while John watched, eyebrows raised. What? John asked. Don't give me away if you value Jamie's life, she says as she threw herself on the velvet love seat, covering her face with a towel and going limp as if she had swooned. Man, that is a great tool. Could you imagine in 21st century swooning and having anybody know what it meant, or that it could give you a way out of a situation? The Admiral enters, and he talks to Lord John, and then he notices Claire and says, "Oh, I collect you are engaged." Lord John explains the lady was overcome by finding the body. "Oh, yes, it's a beastly shock for a lady." John says he thinks so, as she's had enough brandy to fell a horse. Totally trash-talking Claire. She's had not a spot of brandy. The Admiral says he has men to be used to help find the assailant, and one of the officers makes a rude, nasty remark about wanting to hang the yellow man himself. Now the Admiral and John clarify the laws over such sentiments. The Admiral also tells John he's at his disposal if he needs anything, and then they all left. John comes back and sits heavily down into his chair and waits. He tells Claire, "You can get up now if you wish. I am supposing you are not in fact prostrate with shock." Somehow I suspect that a mere murder would not be sufficient to discompose a woman who could deal single-handedly with the typhoid epidemic. Very good, John, very good. And I think the claws are coming out just a little bit. And he sits staring at her. She sits up and says, "There are shocks and there are shocks, if you know what I mean." He understands what she means and reaches into his drawer to get out her fan. It's the one she had dropped earlier. "This is yours, I suppose. I found it in the corridor." "I see. I suppose, then, you will have some notion of how your appearance earlier this evening affected me." "I doubt it very much. You didn't know Jamie was married?" She felt icy and had a lump in her chest and needed to make herself breathe. She saw a small wince of pain on his face before he blinked. He knew Jamie had been married, he said, but Jamie told him or led him to believe that she was dead. "Has he never mentioned me?" he asked me softly. Pain or anger. Claire felt some small pity for him. She explains Jamie told her he was his friend, and this brightened John considerably. And then she says that they had been separated by the war, the Rising. They both thought the other dead, and she found him again only 4 months prior. Gosh, it had felt like lifetimes, not months to Claire, with all that had happened. John tries to understand. He looks at her dumbfounded that they'd been apart for 20 years and only back together for 4 months. Why? How? He wondered out loud, but then he decided it wasn't important and says, "But he has not told you about Willie?" "Who's Willie?" John showed her a small portrait, an oval miniature. Her knees went weak as she looked at the face. It's Bree's face. This was Bree's brother. And she describes what he looks like, his Viking looks, and her hands trembled violently, and she places it back on the desk. "You didn't know? Who is his mother?" Her voice was hoarse, and she had to force it clear. Oh, poor Claire, to learn this way. The shite has hit the fan. And John being the messenger, not Jamie. This creates some sort of kill the messenger tension, but it's vastly interesting for Claire to find out this way. And why is John so eager to spill all the beans? That's what I want to know. So at this point, he's left holding the bag of shite and has to explain to the best of his ability. And in Claire's head, she hears Jenny's voice. "He's no the sort of man who should sleep alone, Willie's mother is dead. He tells her that she was his wife's sister, Geneva Dunsany." "Your wife?" she said, goggling at him. John flushed and looked away. Claire knew John is in love with Jamie. For sure now. She demands he explains what he has to do with Jamie, Geneva, and this boy. "I cannot see that I am under any particular obligation to do so," he says. "Oh, John, she's going to cut you, man." He saw she wanted to violently assault him and prepared to move away quickly. Instead, she breathed and unclenched her fists before replying. This is unusual for Claire. She actually kept her cool and didn't just, start throwing crap at him. Basically, she says, he's right. But why would he show her a picture if he didn't mean for her to know? And she would like to hear his side, because Jamie's going to tell her everything anyway. And he asks if she wants brandy. She does, and thinks he needs some too. "Is that a medical opinion, Mrs. Malcolm?" "Absolutely." So at this they have made a little tiny truce. But he uses Jamie's name, and she flinches. And he asks what name she prefer he use. And she plays it off. And she tells him what she knows, that he was the governor of Ardsmuir and a trustworthy friend of Jamie's. Claire wasn't so sure about that. John explains meeting at Ardsmuir, then the arrangement for Hellwater. It was a place owned by family friends. He couldn't bear the thought of never seeing Jamie again. He then gave her sort of the bare bones of Geneva's death and Willie's birth. and Claire asks if Jamie was in love with Geneva. John says Jamie never talked to him about Geneva, but he doubts it, knowing the girl. He never told him about Willie either, but there was gossip, and by the time the boy was 4 or 5, the resemblance was clear to anyone who cared to look. And he really thinks that his mother-in-law knows, but she wouldn't say anything due to the title of being the 9th Earl of Ellesmere versus Willie being the penniless bastard of a Scots criminal. Yeah, you do the math on that. Claire tries to imagine Geneva and Jamie together, and she can do it far too well. And clearly, Jamie saw it too, the resemblance. And he arranged to leave Hellwater before it became too obvious to everyone. And Claire realizes this is where John comes in. Jamie gave the boy to him. And this next several pages is the recounting of the conversation between John and Jamie about Willie. Lady Isabel is mad that Jamie told Willie he is leaving. Willie was dreadfully upset by it. Jamie was struggling with the emotions of having to leave his son. John assures him it's the right thing to do, as anyone can see the resemblance at this point. Asks Jamie if he has a looking glass, but of course he doesn't, and he shaves in the trough water reflection. And then he abruptly asked John to walk with him. They went from the paddock to the lower pasture about a quarter mile before stopping. Jamie says he has a favor to ask. John assures Jamie he would never tell someone, as he has suspected for a long time. Jamie doesn't think he would say anything. He said he has something to ask of him, and John immediately says yes without knowing what he's about to ask. But he does know that Jamie wants John to look out for Willie. Jamie said that's it, and it might be an imposition for John to come from London now and then to check on him. Not at all. I came this afternoon to give you some news of my own. I am to be married. Married? To a woman? Jamie shocked. He is in fact marrying Lady Isabel, Geneva's sister. Christ, man, you cannot do it. I can. I made a trial of my capacity in London. Be assured that I shall make her an adequate husband. You needn't necessarily enjoy the act in order to perform it, or perhaps you were aware of that? That's funny. He made a trial of his capacity in London, so he went betting women to see if he could before agreeing to the proposed marriage. Jamie decided wisely not to say what was on his mind. John explains why it is an entirely suitable match. And Jamie, with skepticism in his voice, says, "Is it then?" "It is. There is more to a marriage than carnal love, a great deal more," John sharply replies. One would think that Jamie, of all people, would understand making a choice based on sound reasons to help family and friends, to make a choice not for self, but for the betterment and safety of others. Jamie walks away to think. At this point, John decides to fix his hair. Jamie returns and apologizes. It means John will be there permanently to look after Willie, and John will resign his military commission, and he says it's a relief as he's not meant for army life. Whatever, John, that's funny. He's such a soldier. Jamie is grateful for John to step in as a stepfather to his son. Jamie had never said the words, "my son," out loud before, and it seemed to shock him. He sounded like his collar was on a bit too tight. Then he said he would be obliged to John. Then he throws this little thing into the mix. In return, if you want, I would be willing to, that is. John tried not to laugh at this and laid a light hand on Jamie's arm. He sees Jamie brace himself for the touch. "My dear Jamie, are you actually offering me your body in payment for my promise to look after Willie?" Jamie flushes to the roots of his hair. I am. Do you want it or no?" John breaks out into guffaws over this. He needs to sit down to recover, actually. "Oh, dear God, that I should live to hear an offer like that!" Jamie may have a look of profound relief mixed with humor, John thinks. "You dinna want me, then?" "I shall probably want you to the day I die, but tempted as I am..." He shook his head. He then goes on to ask Jamie if he thinks he would actually accept or demand such a payment for the service. His honor should really be insulted by the offer, except he knows the depth of feeling that prompted it. "Aye, well, I didn't mean to insult you." John reaches up to touch Jamie's cheek gently. "Besides, you cannot give me what you don't have." John knows it is unrequited. Jamie has no longing or love for John that way. Jamie offers his friendship, and John accepts. They prepare to part as it is late, and they both have things to do. There's an awkward pause, and Jamie reaches up and grabs John's face in his hands and kisses him on the mouth. Gray felt the big hands warm on the skin of his face, light and strong as the brush of an eagle's feather, and then Jamie Fraser's soft, wide mouth touched his own. There was a fleeting impression of tenderness and strength held in check, the faint taste of ale and fresh baked bread. Then it was gone, and John Gray stood blinking in the brilliant sun. "Oh," he said. Jamie gave him a shy, crooked smile. "Aye, well, I suppose I'm maybe not poisoned." He turned then and disappeared into the screen of willows, leaving Lord John Gray alone by the mere. Interesting. Very interesting. So what did you think of that? My first impression was, wowza! Jamie had nothing to offer from John's telling of it, and it was a real offer. But the kiss, why, perhaps it's the only thing he could give that was intimate, that he could do that was heartfelt and a true thank you. I was trying to remember if men routinely kissed each other on the mouth during that time period, and I don't think so. So what did you make of that? I would love your feedback. It's such an interesting moment, and it's told from John's perspective. We haven't heard Jamie's perspective on this. And part of me wonders, could his offer in general have been some sort of test? John certainly knows how to tell a story. Can you imagine Claire sitting there rapt, listening to the whole thing? Before Claire can say anything, John tells her that was the first time Jamie willingly touched him, and the second time was that evening when he gave Jamie a copy of the miniature. Claire really sat there speechless and motionless. She was feeling a myriad of emotions: shock, fury, horror, jealousy, pity. It was all confusion and jumbled up inside of her. Nothing seemed to matter except what lay between Claire and John at that very moment. He says he should have recognized her on the ship, but he thought her long dead. Wait, what did he say? Then he asks if she remembers the dark wood near Carrierick 20 years before, and the young boy with the broken arm that she had to set. Jesus H. Roosevelt Christ. Now she drank the brandy. "Yours were the first breasts I'd ever seen. It was a considerable shock," he says. Coldly, she says he appears to be recovered and to have forgiven Jamie for breaking his arm and threatening to shoot him at least. He flushes and stammers. They sat in heavy silence before John decided to speak. He began, and he stopped. "Do you know what it's like to love someone and never, never be able to give them peace, joy, or happiness?" His eyes were filled with pain. "To know that you cannot give them happiness, not through any fault of yours or theirs, but only because you were not born the right person for them." And this caused her to think of Frank. "Only because you were not born the right person for them." "I know," is all she said. She remembers telling Frank to leave her, but he couldn't any more than she could love him rightly, having found her match somewhere else. Silently, she asked Frank to forgive her. I think this is when she realizes she was the problem in that 20 years. He loved her, and nothing he could do would be right enough, or good enough, or plainly enough. She was in love with another man, Jamie Fraser. She's the one who kept that distance. It wasn't Frank, Was he perfect? No. Did he keep secrets? Yes. Was he selfish? Sure. But that's humanity. None of us are perfect in our marriages, and we all have something to contribute. And I think John just stabbed her with the big old truth stick and told her what was what without even knowing it. How convicting. John asks if she believes in fate. He thinks she should, but she isn't sure. John says Jamie gave him the most precious gift in William. Claire touches her belly, thinking that Jamie gave her the same precious gift and at the same great cost to himself. He sent a pregnant Claire away to safety. He left William to guarantee William's safety and upbringing. And at this, footsteps sounded in the hall, and the militiamen looked in. The carriage had returned. Claire stands quickly. She turns to John, not knowing what to say, and he bows and comes around the desk to see her out. I regret extremely that you should have been subjected to such a shocking experience, Mom. And as she was leaving, she impulsively turns. When we met that night aboard the Porpoise, I'm glad you didn't know who I was. I liked you then. I liked you too then. OMG. Jesus H. Roosevelt Christ on toast. What was he thinking, spilling it all at her feet? Was he trying to get back at her? Was he trying to make himself feel better because he'd never been able to speak of it to anyone before? Was he simply telling her so much because she said Jamie would tell her everything? Jamie didn't talk to John the way he talks to Claire. She's the only person he will reveal pretty much everything to when push comes to shove. So how did John know that Jamie would tell Claire everything? In some jealous way, trying to make her feel jealous and for her to feel as badly as he was feeling. John is only a fictional human, after all. And as they were riding back toward the Blue Mountain house, Claire was feeling like she was sitting next to a stranger in the coach. He had taken off the wig and was suddenly looking like a disheveled Scot and not a Frenchman. She asked Jamie if he thinks Willoughby did it. He doesn't know. Though Willoughby has killed before, this is different. Even with Mrs. Alcott toying with him, it doesn't seem right. Jamie did lie when he told the authorities he didn't know Willoughby well. But the lie included a packet boat, and in 6 days when it returns, if the captain is questioned, they will know there's no such person as Etienne Alexandre. And Claire reflects on how they're already rather unpopular because they know Willoughby. It will be worse in 6 days if he hasn't been found, and that's when the gossip will reach Blue Mountain House and all the servants know who they are. Damn, is all Claire says. You have a nice way with words, Sassenach. Aye, well, all it means is that we must find Ian within 6 days. He's going to go to Rose Hall straight away, but needs to rest a bit first. When they got back to the Blue Mountain house, they tiptoed as to not wake anyone. After undressing, she returns to the bedroom in only the silk chemise. Jamie was standing in his shirt looking out over the lagoon. He beckons her to come see the herd of manatees. The sun was beginning to rise. She is so fatigued, every sense is preternaturally heightened. I love that description. And her awareness of Jamie was as if she was touching him. She thought of all that John had said to her, and it gave her some relief. But Jamie still had not told her about his son. She knows he has good reasons for secrecy, but why not trust her? Maybe because he had loved Geneva? Who among us would not ask those same questions? Would it matter if he had loved her? Yes, to Claire it did. The 20 years didn't change how she felt about him. She couldn't love Frank because of Jamie. Thinking of Jamie loving this young Englishwoman gave her a lump in her throat. She looks and Jamie has a small frown across his forehead. He was thinking about Willoughby, and Jamie may have found a way to make sense of it if Willoughby did such a horrible thing. And that when a man is alone that way, well, it's maybe no decent way to say it, but making love to a woman is maybe the only thing that will make him forget it for a time. He confesses that's what made him wed Leary. Not Jenny's nagging, not pity for her daughters, not a pair of aching balls. He needed to forget he was alone. That is a piece of magnificent insight into Jamie. So if Willoughby had gone to the woman seeking that, and she wouldn't, he might see Willoughby losing it and killing her. Claire stands next to Jamie, and they watch a single manatee drift to the surface, turning on her back to hold her infant toward the sunlight. Mama manatee! Squee! How much do we love that? But I love that visage of a parent. Silence extends a few minutes, and then Jamie resigns himself to say something. He looked like he was going to face battle. He has to tell her something, and she backs away from him, but he grabs her arm. He puts an object in her hand. Claire knows what it is without looking at it. Claire, I must tell you, I have a son. She opens her hand to see the miniature oval she had seen in John's office. Jamie says he should have told her at once, but he's never told anyone, not even Jenny. This startles Claire to the core. He tells her it was in England and he cannot claim the boy as his own. He hasn't seen him since he was a small boy, until this portrait. I was afraid to tell you, for fear you would think that perhaps I'd gone about spawning a dozen bastards, for fear you'd think that I would not care for Brianna so much, if you kent I had another child. But I do care, Claire, a great deal more than I can tell you. Will you forgive me? She asks if he loved her. At that question, sadness crosses over him. No. He explains she wanted him, and he should have found a way not to sleep with her. He believes he's guilty of her death because she died post-delivery. Claire puts her hand on his face, and she asks what Willie is like. He smiled. He's spoilt and stubborn, ill-mannered, loud, wi' a wicked temper and a brawn bonny and canty and strong. And yours. And mine. He responds with tears under his lids. And Claire agrees he should have trusted her. He says perhaps he should, but how to tell everything about Geneva, Willie, and John? Does she know about John? Yes. John told her about everything, she discloses. And Jamie's brows rise. And then he adds, especially after you found out about Leary, how could I tell you and expect you to know the difference? What difference? Geneva wanted his body. Leary needed his name and the work of his hands so she and the girls could survive. As for John, he couldn't give him what he wanted, and was a good enough friend not to ask. But how shall I tell you all these things, and then say to you, it is only you I have ever loved? How should you believe me? If you say it, I will believe you. He's stunned at this. And then she says, because you're an honest man, Jamie Fraser, and may the Lord have mercy on you for it. Only you, to worship you with my body, give you all the service of my hands, to give you my name and all my heart and soul with it. Only you, because you will not let me lie, and yet you love me. Chew on that for a second, a minute. Claire accepts his honesty and still loves him. Yes, he should have told her sooner, but he did tell her without prompting. She didn't have to ask. She understands the complexity of the time and of him and what he's been through. And this is when she touches him. She tells him he's not alone anymore and says, I swore to you when we were married. I didn't mean it then, but I swore, and now I mean it. and she touched the scar where the dirk had made the cut before their blood vow. She presses her wrist to his. Blood of my blood. Bone of my bone, he says back, and then kneels before her like a Highlander swearing an oath to a chieftain. I give you my spirit, till our life shall be done. But it isn't done yet, Jamie, is it? Then he rose and took the shift from her, and she lay back on the narrow bed naked, pulling him down to her through the soft yellow light, and took him home and home and home again. And we were neither of us alone. Their physicality is part of their language, right? But looking at this and all these revelations and all the things he had to tell her, all the secrets, the things he was withholding, and yes, there were sins of omission, that at this point, they truly come back as one flesh. They're recommitting to each other and moving forward. The secrets are out in the open. Well, the big ones anyway, the real secrets. There's a few things she doesn't know, but they're not heavy like this, like marrying Leary and not being divorced from her and having another child. Those are big things. And I think this is when their relationship completely takes flight again. There's humility and conscientiousness, and Claire changed the way that she would listen, and she was open to listening and not just reacting like she did when she found out about Leary. Well, that was a bad way to find out, granted, but she didn't run away. She stayed the course, and she listened to everything John said, and she listened to everything Jamie said, and that shows a difference in Claire, and that shows her steadfastness and what she means to do. There's so much meat in these chapters. I want to know, how did you respond to John's revelations the first time you read it? What about the murder? How do you think Claire did handling all the information? What about her and John seeming to be frenemies now? Will they find young Ian at Rose Hall? Did Willoughby really do it? And what the heck is it about the Reverend? We're getting close to the end of the book now. Mere chapters. We're almost done. Again, thank you for joining me for months, half a year of a read-along. I appreciate you, and I look forward to recording and doing my script and editing every week, because I know you're listening to it. Where can you find A Dram of Outlander? On Instagram and Twitter, it's Dram of Outlander. On Facebook, there's A Dram of Outlander page, and there's a private A Dram of Outlander group only for podcast listeners. How can you support the podcast? Please tell other people about it. Share it to your friends on social media. Have them like the pages. Go to the website and follow it. All of that helps. Please go and do a review on iTunes if you listen through that service. You can also make a one-time financial donation, or you can go to patreon.com/adramofOutlander and make a monthly contribution. Another way to support the podcast is interact. I love that. Send me an email at adramofoutlander@gmail.com with your thoughts, questions. Hey, you want me to switch it up? Let me know. You can leave a message on the voicemail line at 719-425-9444. Join in on the Wednesday night chats. I plan on keeping them going. Just ad infinitum. We're going to keep going. The only time I will miss is if I'm doing my day job, my regular job, actually my 24-hour job as a midwife, and have to catch a baby. But it's Wednesday night on Twitter. We use the hashtag ADOO, and we talk about the prior chapters. that were discussed in the previous Saturday's podcast. And I hope now you enjoy a little special treat.
You hear that? That's the sound of pissing rain in good old Scotland. But don't let that put you off visiting next year. Agatha Brown here, Scottish Gaelic consultant at Outlander, wishing you all the very best for Christmas and the New Year. Don't forget to reuse and recycle, and have a great time. All the very best. Gramor and Maaki.
Hello everyone at A Dram of Outlander. I'm wishing Desiree and all of you a Happy New Year from Teresa at Outlander Kitchen. Salon Java!
And I appreciate you so much. And until next time, when it's 2017, Slán Java and Happy New Year.